Well, we're getting to the point in the rehabilitation process for the Palace of the Governors where we feel that it's possible to open it up when there are breaks in construction to allow the public to get into the building. This is going to be the palace without any exhibits in it. And we've got between now, which is the beginning of August, and the end of the year, so December, where we'll be doing work, but we will allow people to come through on guided tours to experience the building just as a building, as a historic building. And we think that's really important for people to be able to do. Then it will be by reservation. It'll be coordinated through our front desk. And what I'm anticipating is that we will know about 2 weeks in advance what the construction schedule is. So once we have the construction schedule, we'll be able to basically post it, let people know. We'll be using whatever media we can to help people understand that. It could also include a sign outside the front door on Lincoln that says, sign up for tours of the palace.
And we can put that on the website, the museum website as well.
Yes, it needs to be something that we can update on a regular basis, because if something happens, the construction really has to proceed. But it's not going to be going solid all the time for months on end, and so it just makes a lot of sense to be able to allow people in when we can.
What's the cost for these tours?
There won't be any cost other than admission. So once you get into the museum, as long as there is space on the tour for that particular day, then people will be able to go. Welcome to the Palace of the Governors. The tours that we're going to be doing this fall are going to focus on 4 different themes. One is we want people to come away with an understanding of how the building developed and changed over a 400-year period. Another thing that's important is that this is a National Historic Landmark. That means that there are certain kinds of guidelines we should be using in terms of how we protect this building, and we'll want to talk about that. We understand what we do about the palace because of 4 different sources, and that understanding those sources is going to be a part of the 3rd theme that we'll have in the tours, and that involves archaeology, looking at historic documents, doing what you might call architectural forensics, where we actually look at the material itself to understand how it came to be, when it was installed, and such. And then the 4th major theme is that the current use of this building is as a museum, and it's been a museum at least since 1909. And we want people to understand what that has meant, because the way that museums interact with the public, how they tell stories, how they show objects, has changed in the more than a century since this building opened as a museum. So those are the 4 themes that we'll want to talk about as we walk through the palace and explore it without having exhibits in it. Okay, so this is an exhibit case that dates from the 1913 remodeling of the palace as a museum. That was state of the art at the time. There were shelves that were put in here that were used to exhibit Pueblo pottery. This is not the way we do displays today. And so one of the questions and the challenges that we have is how to reuse these spaces so that we maintain the architectural feature of the room and at the same time are able to have the room work in a 21st century sense as a good gallery space.
Okay, go ahead.
So in this room, we can also notice something that's unique to this particular gallery space, and that is that we have an original ceiling from the 1909 to 1913 remodel. The beams that have been chamfered, cut along the edges, and then have been carved into patterns, have created these coffers, these spaces between the beams that are exposed. And in the corners of each of the 4 corners of the room, the people who were remodeling the building put in a Pueblo pot as a decorative element within the space. Now, in this room, we also have murals that are being protected by plastic so that they are safe from any construction that goes on in here. Those also date from the 1913 time period. And looking around and looking very closely, there's a little figure that's been scratched into the plaster, and I don't know anything about that particular thing at this point, but that's the delight of walking through a building and looking closely at it. I don't know how significant that is, but it's part of the history of the palace. We've seen these big, thick walls, and our temptation is to say, oh, that's a really thick adobe wall. Well, this is an example of one of those big, thick walls that is actually frame with metal lath and plaster on the outside of it. This was part of the modification that was made to the palace during the 1909 to 1913 time period when it was made into a museum. It doesn't mean that there wasn't a wall there. It just means it wasn't the kind of wall that was needed at the time in terms of this being a gallery space. So what we have is that this was a place where there would have been an exhibit case built into the wall, and in order to make sure that it would carry the load, you had a frame structure that was built. After the palace's rehabilitation work is finished at the end of the calendar year, we will be opening up a number of exhibits in the building. The first one is going to be in the galleries at the far east end of the palace, and those are going to be a photographic recording of the expedition of the friars Escalante and Dominguez in 1776. We will then be opening an exhibit in April that is called The Palace Seen and Unseen. That'll be in the central part of the palace. That will be an exhibit that covers the chronology of the development of the building, historic records that are used, and other research techniques to understand the building, what it means to be a National Historic Landmark, and what it means to be a museum building. So that will be part of the Palace Seen and Unseen. That will be opening in April. And then in the summer, we will have an exhibit that will be opening that talks about Native American views of this particular area and of the palace in particular, and it's called A Place of Water.
Yes, I do. We're going to be 1500s to 1900s of New Mexico's history. And it continues downstairs another level and a half to present day.
Yeah.
So that would be another kind of thing we sort of work on in terms of
Yes,
storyline.
I love it. Any ideas you get or any, some lazy know that my focus is not on historic sites at this point. I had all of them.
Fire alarm guy, he's all out. So back home, it's not as strict. Here it is.
And I got offered a couple jobs that had like benefits and, you know, insurance. And the goal here for me is both Richard and I came from TV background. Okay. This is the way to go. So, reserve for next year when we go to promote it, we've got file test, they can say, you know, and it'll just for
History broken, and that was replaced by a similar kind of glass, but not exactly the same kind of glass. So we're talking a little about the history of the palace. The small glass panes are interesting because they are a ribbed. Let me tell you, we're aiming for Labor Day weekend. Right. Okay. I don't want the word to get out it's going to be Labor Day weekend because I don't even have a docent sign up yet. Okay. That's what we're aiming for is that we would start tours during that time period. My objective is to get to the point where we can do one a day. Okay. And I don't know what the patient pattern is yet. I don't know whether we do that through Thanksgiving and then we go. Let's try. That's not going to let me tilt that much. Something that's unique to this particular gallery space, and that is that we have an original ceiling from the 90s. I don't know how significant that is, but it's part of the history of the palace. I cannot remember the name of the artist. Actually, this might be close. Let's look over.
Carl, in 1910.
Yeah, these are early. So,
They're staying.
yeah, right.
Do they need some conservation work?
I think not as part of this
Project,
particular
yeah.
project. Notice that the boards are of differing widths. In some of the rooms, they're much more regular.
This is the height of the doorway during the Spanish period over here?
Right.
This is like the US Constitution. We were all idiots.
Yeah, so this doorway dates from the 1890s. This is late territorial American. Is going to both showcase this, hopefully cut down on the glare.
So there was a fireplace right there?
Fireplace right there.
Sorry,
No. I'm having a good time. And if you look closely at the edges of the wall as you come around, you'll see a ridge that was probably a combination of paint and plaster